Wilbur Whateley is a very bizarre character created by H.P. Lovecraft in his short story, The Dunwich Horror. And he always fascinated me as a real mix and mashup of all kind of bizarre, unrelated elements, and I decided to do a papier-mâché figure of him. He's huge, and for me, I hadn't even attempted anything this size, so it was a great learning experience for me. The frame was basically a 2-inch PVC pipe that had to be heavily reinforced because it wobbled so much. And I found that I had to work my way from the bottom up to gain greater stability and strength, so that as I worked, the piece actually got stronger and stronger. This was a childhood fascination for me. I just loved the description of the character. It was very, very strange, and I always wondered if it was even feasible to make it look like the parts belonged to each other. At any rate, I kept at it. A lot of the frame, especially the torso and legs, were built out with cardboard first and then crumpled paper to define the forms a little bit more. And I use a lot of brown paper, like grocery shopping bags, for heavier and larger projects like this, just because they build up a really good strength very, very quickly. And so it was a matter of defining things slowly, piece by piece. And the great thing about working on a figure this large is that you don't have to worry too much about drying time, simply because by the time you finish one section and are letting that dry, you can hop to the other side and do an arm or a leg or a tail or whatever it is. And in that way, this was a pretty continual project, which was good because I think this was about 6 weeks of work. I started in August for display at the H.P. Lovecraft Film Festival here in Portland, and I think that was the first week of October, maybe, something like that. And I was doing other projects at the same time. So once I have the papier-mâché paper strip forms done, and it's really solid, I start with my papier-mâché pulp. This is a not quite clay-like material, but it's a mix of shredded paper and glue and a few other things, and it works to do the final detail layer. It works very differently than clay, and I had to come up with a lot of new techniques to be able to get the level of detail and texture that I was looking for. And eventually it worked out really, really well. I was very happy with the way it happened. Here you see the beginning of a bunch of tentacles coming from his abdomen, which is one of the more bizarre aspects of the character. This was a lot harder than I thought because I think there's 20-something tentacles. They all had to be coordinated and then done separately and then placed separately and finished separately. It wasn't as easy as just building up the rest of it as I did with the rest of the figure. The tentacles here, again, had to be done individually. These are basically wire forms, crumpled paper, and then paper strip on top of that. Here you see me trying to figure out how to make them look like writhing tentacles and still not create such a mess that I couldn't work with it. I also had to reinforce the base quite a bit, added plywood, casters, I added foam, I added many layers of hard cardboard on top. This wound up being quite a heavy piece, much heavier than I expected, especially as I wound up putting a lot of thicker layers of the papier-mâché pulp on. Here you see the individual tentacles being finished and papier-mâchéed in place. The figure itself is about just under 9 feet tall. The first head I started was basically a clay sculpture that I did paper strip on top of. And I got it fairly well along until I just decided I hated that head, and I threw it away. I abandoned it and started again in a different technique using corrugated cardboard to build up the head form. and then did my paper strip on top of that. The head, because I really didn't want to be working on it at 9 feet in the air, I decided to make removable so I could finish it off. I did 3 sets of eyes because I wasn't sure what size was going to fit. Finally wound up going with the largest ones. And at the same time, I was trying to draw the 2 separate sections together, that is the neck and the head. I knew I was going to be able to cover it quite easily because he's quite hairy, quite a hefty beard on him, and I knew that was going to disguise any joint, but the joint still had to get quite close to be able to do that. And I finally got there. The head came along to a point where I was much happier with it. And I'm so glad I actually did make that change. One of the great things about paper mache in general is it's not a big deal to redo anything. It's very easy to just cut sections out and replace them. So it's a very malleable system in that sense. I didn't want to use any human hair, synthetic hair. This is actually jute fiber that's been dyed, plant fiber, and applied. I wanted much coarser, heftier kind of feel to the hair, and this did a good job of it. And then it got to the point of painting, which was a lot more of a challenge than I thought, because it's so wildly different as Lovecraft describes it. The sort of reptilian legs, the obvious eyes in his hips. Where did he come up with that one? Anyway, so it's very fleshy there. The tentacles are fleshy. Obviously the head arms are much more skin textured, and yet the torso had this weird yellow-black piebald coloration that's very specific in the story. So this was part of the challenge for me, was really trying to bring together all these disparate elements into one figure. It's still bizarre by any stretch of the imagination. And his legs were hairy in the description, so I did wind up going with a synthetic fur for that I thickened and made look much more coarse with some acrylic gel that I used. I was very happy the way that came out as well. You can see it here. Very coarse looking. And that's pretty much how he came together. He was a big success at both an art show and the Lovecraft Festival. And I'm just so glad that I'm probably never going to attempt anything that size again.